Hello and welcome back to Season 5 of the MRX Lab podcast, the show from FlexMR where this year we're on a mission to uncover the many ways that market research connects the world around us and learn how to navigate a fast-changing business landscape. I'm really excited for this episode to be joined by Paul Griffiths, founder and CEO of Client Advocates, a consultancy that helps research agencies grow and client-side leaders increase commercial impact. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey Chris, how you doing?
Really good. Really excited for this conversation.
Good, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me on. It's I've been kind of watching your pod and watching the stuff that FlexMR puts out for a while. So it's nice to be finally elevated to the echelons of seniority within the world of market research.
Well, I think you've got a lot to share with our audience, and it's going to be a fantastic conversation. So really appreciate that. And to get us started today, before we dive into today's topic in full, the commercial challenges of research, could you, for our audience, share a bit about yourself and what you do at Client Advocates?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, as you've already said, I work with two different groups of people. I work with owners of market research and insight and data agencies, and I help them with their growth. So commercial strategy, marketing, sales, figuring out how they can elevate their growth trajectories and hopefully be more successful, whatever that kind of looks like for that agency. And then I also work with end clients, so heads of insight, commercial directors, marketing directors, who own or who are responsible for the insight functions in big businesses. And I help them essentially to improve the impact of their research and insight functions. So that might be managing internal stakeholders, it might be managing their supply chain, so their agencies, it might be about setting their strategies so that they can justify more budget, or actually demonstrate that what they're doing isn't a cost, but actually an investment that generates growth within their businesses. Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very lucky. It's a very cool thing that I do, and I'm lucky enough that people occasionally give me some money to do it. So it's good fun.
And I suppose it also puts you in a really good vantage point in the industry to see what's happening on kind of both sides of that divide. It'd be great to start with the agency side. So you work with a lot of different agencies, all shapes and sizes.
Yep.
In your opinion, what are some of the common challenges that they're facing today?
Mm-hmm. So I honestly, I think the biggest challenge is, how do you, as an agency, in the economic environment we're in at the moment, with the disruption that's going on in the industry, created by technology and by the economic headwinds, what can you as an agency do to maintain and grow your client relationships? So how do you find new clients, and how do you kind of bring them on board? But also, how do you maintain and build and strengthen the relationships you have with your existing clients? I think that's, for most of the agencies I work with, that seems to be one of, if not the biggest challenge. How do we get new business? How do we keep our existing stuff?
And I suppose a big part of that is this debate around how much can you systematize something like that versus how much does it rely on people and individual relationships. Where do you fall on that debate?
So I'm really excited and really positive about what's going on in the industry at the moment, because I think what we've got is a confluence of a couple of things. So traditional research agencies are pretty good at managing their client base. Most agencies worth their salt have got account management teams, they've got account management processes, and they do some engagement with their existing, or what they call lapsed clients, although I hate the concept of a lapsed client, but we might get onto that. But what I can also see is that you've got the res tech industry. So actually people like, FlexMR that have come in and look at this world of sales and look at the world of insight in a different way. So they take a far more of a kind of a SaaS technology sales and engagement process. Now, I think where the excitement lies for me is bringing those two approaches together, and what can more traditional research agencies learn from the res tech platforms and the technology approach to engaging and managing and selling and nurturing clients, and what can the res tech platforms and the technology people within the research and data industry, what can they learn from more traditional account management techniques that actually are about building relationships and growing and adding value and filling the gaps between the projects. And I think that's where a lot of my clients are moving to, is how can we bring those two approaches together? And I think that's, I know from the end client work I do, that actually that approach of having a more systemized sales approach and nurture approach, coupled with a real genuine focus on relationships and building trust and rapport and understanding commercial issues, is kind of a really, really sweet spot. So I think, I think, you need to have the systemization, but you need to have the relationship and that deep connectivity as well.
It's something I definitely agree with. I mean, as a marketer, and this is something that came up again in Marketing Week recently, the constant frustration of the question, does that apply to B2B marketing?
The Ritson article, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. No, I've read it. In fact, I'm going to be posting it on LinkedIn at some point because I think it's worth sharing.
And we like to find all these divisions between, how do we approach the consumer world? How do we approach B2B? How do we approach marketing and agency? There's actually a lot more similarities between all of those than we think. But if there is a difference, I don't think it's between consumer, B2C, and B2B. I think it's between that and agencies, because really the agency model of very highly focused account management, client relationship building, that is slightly different to both B2B and B2C marketing. I think that's what we're seeing, those two worlds starting to collide. A very person-based approach, account-based approach coming into contact, and I think being enhanced by B2B, B2C marketing, and learning how those two things work together.
Completely. And I think, you just have to look at, I mean, I've drunk the Kool-Aid on Byron Sharp. So I absolutely buy the idea of, this is about how do you get your brand to grow? Well, you need to build that brand salience. How do you build brand salience? Well, you do that through marketing. But the point is that, and that's fine for bringing on new clients. But as you've just alluded to, actually B2B is not B2B. B2B is P2P, it's person to person. And what you can do is, if you can use the techniques for building brand salience, and you conjoin those with the approaches of using account management and building those personal relationships, that's a really potent growth mix. And the agencies that I can see, the research and insight agencies that I can see growing, some of whom I work with, lucky enough to work with, are really, really kind of joining those two things together. They've got some really smart, focused brand building activity that they're doing through things like podcasts, and they are also really, really focusing in on that person to person and building those relationships, using all the leverage and all the marketing and all the potent content from their marketing and their brand building. So the two things absolutely reinforce each other. This concept of we've got marketing over here and we've got account management and sales over here is in my opinion, certainly for businesses that I work with, which don't tend to be relatively that big. They're not from an agency perspective. They're not. They're probably not the $100 million agencies. They're probably the $10 to $50 million agencies. The separation of sales and marketing strikes me as being kind of slightly bonkers, if I'm honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you've mentioned Byron Sharp there. I could spend probably the next hour talking brand salience and Byron Sharp. So to avoid that fate, let's switch gears and talk about the other group you work with. What kind of challenges are you seeing, or what kind of pressures are you seeing facing client side insight teams?
So I say this to both groups of people all the time. However hard you think you've got it as the leader of an agency, I think you've got it equally as hard at the moment being a head of insight, because I can see a couple of systemic shifts going on within the sort of the client side world. The first is the demand for insight and for commercially led advice within businesses has only increased, and it's increased since the pandemic. I think it's that process was going on, but I think it's increased exponentially after the pandemic. I think most businesses now have a real demand and a real urgency around data-led decision making, and I think that puts huge opportunity but also huge pressure on the insight teams and the insight functions, because at the same time as that demand is coming through, I think there are a couple of shifts and changes. So I can see that if you're a head of insight, the challenge for you is you haven't got the budgets you possibly had. You certainly don't have the budgets you had during COVID, where kind of there was a bit of a boom post-COVID, especially because people were like, I don't know what I don't know, so let's put some money into insight. That has all kind of retracted and returned to normal, I think, to normal spend levels. Plus, most of these organizations are under significant economic commercial pressures because of cost of living, economic headwinds, whatever it might be. So heads of insight have got increased demand for what they do, and they need to be providing that quickly and effectively and with great commercial impact. But at the same time, they're being asked to do that with less budget and with less, and the days of kind of, a really good example. I was talking to a head of insight recently, and they were saying, in the old days, I say the old days as in, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, they might have spent £500,000 on a brand tracker or some big, systemic, strategic project. Now, what they say they might do is they might spend £300,000. So, they've got a significant budget cut, and they might be running 6 or 7 or 8 different projects. So the demands on their team and on them from a project management and a supply management and a stakeholder management internally are far greater. Now, I think there are some huge opportunities there, because I think, the positive news is there's great opportunities to demonstrate the impact of research and insight, and heads of insight need to be kind of aware of that and leveraging that. On the other hand, there's great opportunities for agencies, because if you're an agency, yes, the overall budget's being cut, but your opportunity to demonstrate value to the client has increased, and the need to be flexible and to be consultative has also increased, because heads of insight and their teams don't have the bandwidth that they used to have to do a lot of thinking, because they're trying to get through so much. So the agencies that do the thinking and do the consultation and actually generate the commercial value, there's massive upside for them, even though budgets as a whole are under pressure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It reminds me of, I think just in the last few days, I'm not sure if you'll have seen the article from Research Live, the research published by GRBN.
Yes. Yeah. Brilliant. I mean, and it's so interesting to see how that shifted. See how that shifted from 2019, I think, when did the last one to the new one. I mean, again, that's another article. That's another thing I'm going to be sharing on LinkedIn, because I think it's worth having a look at. I think the other pressure is that, and again, I don't have a quantitative sample on this, but qualitatively, what I can see from conversations I'm having with heads of insight is that the shift of budget is moving from primary research into more data, data purchasing and data analytics and systemic analysis. And a lot of these businesses are building data and analytics teams. Sometimes they sit outside of the world of the insight functions, and I think that creates some nervousness for heads of insight. But I think that's the other pressure coming in, and I think agencies that can reflect and sort of potentially help and support in that regard also have an opportunity.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Again, mentioned in that report that the businesses which have the highest level of insights maturity are those that are integrating data and analytics with market research. So clearly, there's some kind of opportunity in there for heads of insight and agencies to support that.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things I end up doing is I seem to do quite a lot of coaching. I'm not a coach, so I don't call it coaching, but actually a lot of the time I'm sitting down with a head of insight or a head of an agency, and kind of a lot of it is about problem solving and chewing over ideas and coming up with solutions and things to do to kind of move things forwards. And one of the things that I end up talking a lot about with heads of insight is the opportunities to lever this and not to see it as a threat or as a kind of an attack on their domain or on their fiefdom, but actually, you know what? You are in an amazing position to lever your experience and knowledge and and brand salience within your own organization to kind of to make sure that you are directing and getting hold of that agenda, because there's huge opportunity for your teams, for you to grow and to demonstrate impact and to kind of spread your tendrils into the wider organization in a way that a traditional insight team maybe can't do as well. So I think there's huge opportunity, but I'm an optimist.
Well, let's bring some of that optimism, because my next question is about that budget challenge we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a fair amount of evidence recently that budgets are shrinking.
Yeah.
I think the IPA Bellwether alluded to that as well. What are some of the ways that insight leaders can fight for, can make the case for the budgets that they need?
So I think there's an opportunity to change the debate, or to change the dialogue from research and insight is a cost to research and insight is an investment. And I think the heads of insight or the agencies, actually, because I think this is where agencies and heads of insight and insight teams can work together and partner on this, is to demonstrate that you need to shift the dialogue from research is a cost to research as an investment. And the irony is, of course, is that if you look at how much businesses invest in new product or in new services or in their advertising or whatever it is within their marketing and their R&D spend, the amount they spend generally on research and insight is a tiny fraction. And yet it underpins everything that those businesses do. Because without the customer insight, without that understanding of what the consumer or the customer or the client wants, everything else you're doing and all those millions and millions and millions of pounds that you're spending on advertising and NPD, and R&D and all the rest of it, are in danger of being really, really misdirected or wasted or not leveraged to the extent that they should be. And yet, we don't think of research and insight as part of that investment. We think of it as a cost that you have to do. And the agencies and the insight teams that I think are making the biggest steps forward in this regard are the ones that are changing the dialogue and changing the debate about saying, no, insight is not just a cost. This is not something to be managed downwards through procurement. This is an investment, and we need to make sure that the business understands it's an investment. And by the way, if you don't invest, you don't grow. So why are we cutting research and insight budgets when actually we should be treating them as investment and growing our business as a result? Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but I feel quite strongly about it.
No, it's a good rant. I mean, it's it's affecting a lot of businesses in the industry right now, and it's a good question. Why are we cutting budgets when we should be looking to it as an investment? I think there's probably a misnomer in there somewhere around businesses considering that they're spending more on data analytics and research in total, because we're not seeing data and analytics integrated into research and insight. And I think that's another area that probably needs to be addressed, and there's great opportunity to address bringing those things together and looking at that as the total investment rather than market research as a separate thing because it has a different name to data and analytics.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think one of the things that we would all serve ourselves better to do is possibly to start couching what we do, not in terms of what we do, research or data or analytics or qual or quant or any of this stuff, but to actually couch what we talk about and what we do in terms of the value we generate. I would be really, really excited if and I'm sure lots of people are going to cringe and roll their eyes at this, but if insight teams started referring to themselves as growth consultants. They're commercial growth consultants that are using data and insight to help their business grow, rather than, oh yeah, we're the research and insight team, we do research and insight. And I think and that starts to also then shift that view of, well, actually, if we're talking here about growth, how do you get growth? Well, you invest to get growth. Oh, well, look, actually, there's a whole group of people over here that are helping contribute to the commercial growth and success of our business. Possibly those aren't the right people to cut the budgets of.
Yeah, we interesting you mentioned that. We did an episode a little while back with Nicola Stevens from Close Brothers and looked at how she'd positioned her team as decision consultants. Very similar idea, It's hard to argue against the people who help you make better decisions.
Yes, completely. And I think some of this, the irony is that some of the stuff I end up doing with heads of insight and end clients is actually about getting them to be more commercial in the way that I help agencies, because some of this is about in the same way that an agency has to sell to their end client, the insight team has to sell into their stakeholders and actually positioning themselves in the right way so that they are talking about the value they generate in the same way that a successful agency needs to talk, not about we do this or we do that, but this is the value we generate as a result of you working with us. So of course I would say this, but I think there's lots of opportunity for heads of insight and agencies to be more partnering and close together and actually support each other, because it's a win-win.
It absolutely is. So I'm conscious we are nearing the end of our time together, and I've got far too many questions still. But that does raise a really important one. What are some of the things that contribute to a really successful client agency relationship?
Gosh, so that's a really good question. And there are lots and lots of things. I think if I was to kind of think about kind of one or two, I think at the moment, if what I've said is true and heads of insight are under pressure, time poor, overly, in too much demand, and then we have agencies who are sitting there struggling to maintain budgets and win new clients or maintain existing clients, I think we've got to put those two things together. And I think agencies that work really, really hard on building the supportive relationships with clients and targets are the agencies that are going to do well, because it's in their interest to do that. And I think it will also help heads of insight. And it comes back to this, there's a win-win there. So again, I was talking to another head of insight back in September, October time. And I had this Damascus moment because I was chatting about what was leading him to work with certain agencies over a long period of time. And he said this phrase, and I said, I thought it's all right, I'm going to borrow that. He said, yeah, borrow it. But it was Damascus for me because he said it in a way that I've been trying to bang on for years about, but he said it really succinctly. He said, it's the value is in the gaps between the projects. And I was like, yes, that's it. Most agencies are really good at projects. And then they finish a project and they go, oh, thank God that's over. Right, where's the next project coming from? Clients notice that. And the really good agencies don't go, oh, it's the end of the project, phew. They go, right, it's the end of the project. What do I need to now do to maintain and engage the conversation and look to serve and help the end client, my end client, until such time as they've got budget or there's another opportunity to work with me? Because it may well be that actually there isn't any opportunity for another 6 months. But what end client says, agencies go quiet on them, and 3 or 4 months after the last project, they get a phone call or email going, hi, how are you? Haven't heard from you a while. What's going on? And the end client's sitting there going, yeah, your pipeline's a bit low. You've suddenly not got any work. You've remembered that I exist. Whereas the agencies that continually nurture, and I don't by nurture, I don't mean sell. I mean, impart wisdom, impart knowledge, share information, show that they're interested, engaged, that they are thinking about their client and their client's business issues and their client's personal agenda potentially. Then that's where those conversations really generate value. So I think it's around, if there's one opportunity, it's heads of insight really stressed, under a lot of pressure. Agencies desperately want more work and want to kind of nurture relationships. Well, look, aim to help them, aim to help each other, look to serve, look to provide value, and that will over time generate commercial value for both parties.
Yeah, that is a really succinct way of phrasing it. I think
that's unusual. I'm not very often very succinct.
I'll be borrowing that one.
Please do.
That's a great note to end on. I really appreciate everything you've shared with us today. But if there's one thing you'd like our audience to take away from today's episode, what would it be?
Take advantage of the disruption. Disruption is an opportunity. Be positive, be optimistic. And there are lots and lots of ways that you can grow your agency, or you can grow the impact of your insight team. Leverage that. Leverage it as much as you possibly can.
Fantastic. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me on. As I said, I am honoured and privileged to be, kind of in the mix now on the FlexMR podcast. So, thank you for having me.
Officially in the MRX Lab Hall of Fame. And thank you, of course, to everybody listening as well. We'll be back next month with Ian Stanfield of Specsavers to discuss how insight teams can develop organizational foresight and apply two-speed research strategies. Until then, I've been your host, Chris Martin, and this has been the MRX Lab.